Alright guys, my name is Metagoblin and today I'm going to be giving you my class picking guide for Classic World of Warcraft. So as always with my class picking videos, I want to help you gain a deeper understanding of the playstyle of each class and help visualize what your life is going to be like as each and every one of the classes. There might be some role that your chosen class has to perform in a raiding environment that you just don't enjoy, or there might be something that you do enjoy about a certain class, but it's actually not viable. For instance, you might enjoy warlocks because you have demons for pets, but if you're raiding, you're going to have your demons sacrificed most of the time. I'll go through the leveling playstyle first of all, then I'll go through the end game playstyle, and then I'll finish telling you about some unique selling points and some cool gimmicks for each and every class. And just before I jump in guys, please do give me a quick follow on Twitch. I'm doing a little bit of streaming on there at the moment, and I will do a lot more when the game is obviously released. So let's begin with a warrior. So a lot of people moan about how difficult warrior is to level, but honestly it's not that difficult. It's just not as fast and as easy as the other classes. It's because the class relies on gear a lot, particularly having a good weapon. So, but once you get like a decent weapon, you do pretty good damage, and the leveling, you know, it's pretty chilled out, to be honest, but you do have to stop and eat quite a lot because the spec doesn't have the best sustainability. However, when you stack spirit armor, it is a little bit better. You're going to be speccing into Fury until about level 40 and then swapping into Arms, although the respec doesn't really change the rotation of the playstyle that much. Basically what you do is you charge in, you get to combat, you use Heroic Strike or Mortal Strike whenever it's available when you've banked up enough rage, and then basically, after you've kind of killed an enemy, you bank on your rage until the next pull, and then you might want to get a little bit more rage with blood rage, all that kind of stuff. You also have some moderate utility in defensive cooldowns to do with risky encounters. You also have the option to use hamstring counting, however I heard it's actually not working as well as it should do on the beta, so we'll have to look into that. When it comes to endgame, you're going to be specced into Fury and dual wielding the whole time, so say goodbye to those huge two-handed weapons because they only really see use in PvP. And the PvP spec is actually Arms. So you're going to be working towards getting the Lionheart helmet pretty much as early as you can, which is best in slot forever for the whole of vanilla. So yeah, the downside to that is you're going to be looking at the same ugly helmet the whole time you're playing the game. Basically it's a blacksmithing drop from Onyxia. So let me tell you about the rotations. It's actually one of the more interesting rotations that requires some stance dancing and a little bit of focus. You basically use Bloodthirst and Whirlwind whenever they're available, and you use Bloodthirst first in the rotation. And if you're starting getting too much rage, you kind of fill in with Heroic Strike, and if you're low on rage and you get an overpower proc, you have to stance dance into battle stance to get to consume your overpower proc. So you get to use more than one spell, which is more than what can be said for a lot of the other classes. You also have some pretty cool DPS cooldowns, since, you know, before every single class in the game had a DPS cooldown. It's more unique to these like solely DPS classes, and you normally pop these during the execute phase and basically spam execute for huge damage. When it comes to non-DPS roles, warriors don't have that much. They are more of a DPS machine class, but they do have a cast interrupt and a fear, which can be useful from time to time. It's also important to note that if you're progressing further and further into vanilla content, you may also have to do a little bit of tanking even if you are in your DPS specs, so you probably have to get a shield, and because it's just kind of essential for you to progress through the raid content really a lot of the time, because, you know, tanks are hard to come by, and some bosses require more than 2 tanks. Some require like 8 tanks, so that is something to bear in mind. So let's talk about the gimmicks of the warrior. There isn't many because obviously warrior is more of a kind of barbarian DPS machine class, but nonetheless you do have some pretty cool defensive cooldowns like shield wall and retaliation, which pretty much make you immortal for a few seconds. You got sweeping strikes, which is probably one of the best AoE cleaving abilities in the game, and you also get to use a ranged weapon. So while we're talking about the warrior, we have to very quickly talk about tanking. So the great thing about playing a protection warrior, first of all, is it's very easy to get groups. It's a very satisfying feeling, you know, whispering some guy looking for a group and knowing 100% chance that you're actually going to get into that group. And because you're in such a high demand, everyone will basically just love you and want to be your friend, which furthermore means getting groups is going to be even easy. I mean, because you're playing a warrior, everyone has this undermining respect for you, like an unconscious respect, because it is the hardest role to play in Classic World of Warcraft. It requires a lot of concentration, confidence and skill. You're going to be using an ability every single global cooldown, trying to generate a steady stream of rage and aggro while consuming your rage for damage mitigation abilities like shield block and thunderclap, which have to be maintained about 100% of the time. You're basically in control of the raid fight, which is why it's a really good role for a raid leader. You know, it's the most difficult and respected role in vanilla. Whenever you see a warrior in tier 2 gear, you know, you just have to, you do stop a little bit and you go, you know, whew, you know, Christ, that's a pretty skilled player. Especially if it's a Tauren warrior with tier 2 gear. I mean, that's borderline intimidating. Let's move on to the rogue. In many ways they are similar to the warrior in the sense that they are a solo DPS machine class. They have the same issues as a warrior in the, you know, when it comes to leveling, with their bad survivability, bad sustainability, but they kind of make up for it slightly with their utility, such as stealth obviously to skip enemies, increased dodge chance, shorter cooldowns, defensives, and other kind of utility abilities. Your playstyle is going to be straightforward. You won't be using stealth as an opener on every single mob pool, as this wastes time. You only reserve it for specific situations. Basically, you cast Sinister Strike and Riposte when it's ever available, while letting your melee strikes like snugly fit in between each special ability attack. So you probably need a weapon strike timer for that to maximise your DPS. And then when you're at 5 combo points, you just use Eviscerate to finish the mob down. You don't really use Slice and Dice that much, as you know, combat doesn't really last long enough to justify spending combo points on that buff. You will eventually have access to AoE and DPS cooldowns of the later levels, like Adrenaline Rush, Blade Flurry, all that kind of thing. And obviously stealth will make your life really, you know, just a lot easier. You can avoid difficult encounters and hide away from getting ganked. In fact, you can also become the ganker and just kind of get revenge for being ganked in all your years of playing World of Warcraft, which is basically my personal plan, because I've never played Rogue that much, and I'm going to be playing Rogue when a game launches. But anyway, so at endgame, you're going to be dual wielding swords pretty much all the time. There is some viability of using a dagger, but it's generally accepted that double swords is the way to go. The rotation is all about maintaining your Slice and Dice buff and filling in with Sinister Strike and Eviscerate, basically. Like the warrior, the rogue also has a number of DPS cooldowns for you to manage. It's also a very manoeuvrable class because of sprint, but like I said, the class is more about maximising your DPS rather than helping out the raid in other different ways, like a lot like the classes on different classes on this list, the caster classes. They help out in other ways rather than just doing DPS over time. However, for the rogue, you know, your stuns and your kicks will help out from time to time, and it'll also be your job to find traps and disarm them in some raid and dungeon encounters. So let me talk about the gimmicks. First of all, obviously stealth, we talked about that. You've got sprint, which is useful, you know, in PvP and PvE, but also just getting, you know, after you've raid wiped, getting back to the boss a little bit faster, so it was just less walking time. You've got some really cool class quests I thought was interesting to mention. You've got loads of weird RPG gimmicky kind of features like leveling your lockpicking and poison making. You can unlock dungeon doors, you can unlock chests that can't be unlocked by anyone else, and then lock boxes, all that kind of stuff. You've also got access to ranged weapons. You can do pickpocketing, you can go for a dungeon, do loads of pickpocketing, make loads of money. You can disarm traps, you have reduced fall damage, and the last thing I put on here was just you have loads and loads and loads of stuns. Now let's talk about the mage. I quite like the mage leveling style. It's about dealing as much damage as possible while avoiding melee range and being tactical about how to use your snares and like your roots like Ice Nova to pin the enemy down and just kind of escape. On every chill effect caused by your Frostbolt or Ice Armor, there's a chance for you to get a free Ice Nova effect on the target. It's basically called a freeze effect. So you kite as much as you can, but you also want the enemy to get the chill effect from your Ice Armor, so you kind of bump into melee range, let him get a freeze effect and then run away. So the reason why you want the freeze effect to happen is because the basically chance for your Frostbolt to critical strike is further increased. It's called a shatter effect whenever a target is frozen in an Ice Nova or any other kind of effect. Overall, I just think it's a fun and tactical manoeuvrable playstyle for you that will probably keep you interested until level 60. When it comes to endgame, the playstyle becomes a little less interesting in all honesty, because you're probably just going to be casting Frostbolt the whole time. Basically, one mage will spec into this debuff talent, which increases the frost damage of all the other mages in the group, and then the rest of the mages just cast Frostbolt the whole time, and that's it. When you start doing AQ and Nax, there's the opportunity for you to become a fire mage, but it's kind of like the exact same thing. You have one mage who basically debuffs the target with Ignite, and then all the other mages maintain that one Ignite, but it also means that only one mage is going to look really like fat on the DPS meters, so there's that. Mages can do other useful things for the raid though. You know, it's not just about being a DPS machine. They can use Polymorph to crowd control enemies, give raid members food, provide healing amplify buffs. They can decurse, which is really underrated because not many healers can actually have decurse effect. I think it's only a druid that has one. So the fact that mages can decurse is really useful because there's some really nasty curses in certain raid encounters. You can also interrupt casts with counterspell, and obviously you have the best AoE DPS in the game, which is really useful in certain encounters, particularly Onyxia when you're taking down all the whelpings. It's really good for all the mages to get some AoE DPS to clear them down and save the raid. Let's talk about gimmicks for the mage class. One of the big ones is portals, so you just get around the world much faster. You can create your own food, so you never have to buy food. You've got Blink, which is very useful. You've got Ice Block to totally negate damage on you, can be a real lifesaver. You've also got Slow Fall, which is really useful for getting around. You've got Fire Ward and Frost Ward, which is very useful for just absorbing loads of damage. You've got Ice Barrier, Mana Shield, so just got loads of abilities really to just stop you from taking damage. You're actually quite a tanky class. And you've also got Mana Gems to give you a bit of mana boost halfway through a fight, so those are great things. So let's talk about the Hunter. Hunter playstyle involves turning your pet into a beastie monster so that it takes up all the aggro and does most of your damage, while you kind of deal steady damage in the background, trying not to pull aggro. Hunter is a very fast leveler with no downtime between killing enemies. You can just chain pull over and over. You also get Aspect of a Cheetah very low level, so you're very fast at just moving around compared to other classes. In fact, you're probably the fastest, and this is why the main reason why Hunters are the fastest levelers. At endgame, the rotation becomes quite interesting since it's tactical and requires perfect timing to pull off. You basically open with an auto shot, cast aim shot between the time it takes for your next auto shot to happen, then you let the auto shot happen, then cast multi-shot, and you just kind of repeat from there. You see, it's all about perfect timing because you don't want to clip your auto attack with your abilities. Apart from this, Hunter will be responsible for using Tranquility Shot on removing frenzy effects from the enemy. You've got Frost Trap to kite adds, Freezing Trap, which is actually one of the best CC effects in the game because it doesn't care about whether the mob is a humanoid or a beast or something like that. You may also be required to do some kiting, where you basically kite bosses away from the group while they take down ad enemies. This happens on Upper Blackrock Spire. You basically run away with the boss while the rest of your group take down the ads. So let's talk about the Hunter gimmicks. Obviously we mentioned Aspect of a Cheetah, which makes you very fast indoors as well, so running back to your corpse after a raid wipe is, very desirable. You got Pet Management, which is its own thing in itself. I've always described Hunter as basically being its own RPG game because there's so many things to think about. It's probably one of the most interactive classes in the game. I have a number of pet videos on my channel, so you might want to check them out to kind of get a rough grasp of what Hunter Pet Management is all about, because it's basically like playing two classes in one, right? And that's one of the main reasons why I like it. So, other gimmicks, you've got Eye of a Beast, which basically means you can take control of your pet. You can track different types of enemies on the map. You got traps. You can become melee temporarily, kind of like a cross between a ranged and a melee spec, which is another cool thing. Got loads of snares. You got Eagle Eye, which is a kind of works how like Farsight. You basically cast it on some area really far on in the world. I mean, you can kind of see that location. It's kind of great for just being aware of what's going on, avoiding gankers and that kind of thing. You've got a Rapid Fire, which is a really good DPS cooldown. You can fear beasts with Scare Beast. You can also use Viper Sting, which is a really lethal mana drain in PvP. And you've actually got some pretty decent AoE capability if you're smart about how you use your class and how you use Volley and Immolation Trap. So actually not Immolation Trap, Explosive Trap. But anyway, moving on. So Warlock leveling is similar to Hunter leveling because you obviously have a pet. To be honest, they are actually stronger levelers than Hunters because of all the survivability they have. The only reason Hunters level faster is because of Aspects of a Cheetah. Basically, you send your Blueberry into combat, your Voidwalker, and he tanks everything like a boss. He's even more tanky than any Hunter pet. While you basically deal dot damage and use your wand, since dot damage doesn't generate a lot of aggro. This is what the playstyle is all about. It's about getting your pet to take over the aggro and you just kind of slowly rot them down in the background. You have many ways to heal yourself as a Warlock. You have Drain Life, Siphon Life, Health Stone, and lots of CC to protect yourself, like Fear, Howl of Terror, which is an AoE fear, then you've got Horrify, which is a short instant cast fear that also heals you as well. You can also sacrifice your Voidwalker to give yourself a big shield, even more powerful than a mage's Ice Barrier. Oh, and you can obviously resurrect yourself with a Soul Stone, which is really useful. Some people also level with an Imp, since the Imp actually does more damage, but this is more for advanced players and for people not on high populated PvP servers, as it is a little bit more risky. At endgame, your life would be very similar to a mage. You would just be casting Shadow Bolts over and over to maximise your DPS, with your pet sacrifice to increase the DPS further, and this is how you DPS in a raid until the end of the Burning Crusade. To be honest, you just cast Shadow Bolts the whole time. It's important to know that Warlocks are a master debuff class, okay? They're not all about doing damage. Kind of like the Lore Master from Lord of the Rings, if anyone's familiar with that game. I probably doubt it, to be honest. You will have to debuff the enemy to reduce their damage done, with Curse of Weakness, sorry. You can increase their weakness to elements of magic to buff a DPS of other DPS in the group. Apart from this, you are just very useful in a raid environment. You can give warriors health stones, well, the tanks specifically. You can Soul Stone the healer so that they can res in combat. That can be a huge raid saving situation. And obviously the big one is summoning people, which means people just appreciate you more. People will just love you more because you're a warlock and everyone else is just lazy. It means you can also get people to your dungeon faster if you're making a dungeon group. I know I said earlier that the build that most people go for will involve actually sacrificing your pet to increase your shadow damage, but sometimes you will be requested to buff your tank group with the Imp's Blood Pact buff, and then you can combine this with the Black Book, which is a warlock trinket that drops on the first boss in Blackwing Lair, which basically is a DPS cooldown for your pet. And once you've got that, you can actually start doing some pretty decent damage. So there is the option for you to actually do a little bit of pet managing for your pet to actually exist in a raiding environment, because I know a lot of people really like pet classes. I'm included on that one. That's why I've always liked Unholy Death Knight. So there is actually the opportunity there for you to use your pet. You don't have to sacrifice it all the time. So let's go through the gimmicks of the Warlock. First of all, one of the big ones is a free mount at level 40. Well, not totally free, but obviously much cheaper than what everyone else has to pay. You've got Life Tap to basically give you infinite mana as long as you can heal. You have Health Stones, you have Fear, Water Breathing, Soul Stones, Summoning, the Eye of Kilrog, which can be useful for pulling bosses. You've got Track Demons, Detect Invisible, detect invisibility, which is basically a way to find invisible mobs in the game. So there's like mobs which are like totally hidden in the game that only Warlocks can see. Part of the reason for this is to make Warlock Soul Shard farming a little bit easier. You've also got really long CC called Banish for elementals and demons. You've got Drain Life. You've got Hellfire AoE, which is very risky AoE. You've got AoE Fear, Instant Fear, Enslave Demons, so you can just basically take any demon as your pet in the game. You can also summon the Infernal of a Doomguard, right? So this is like kind of like a really big summon, a Ritual of Doom, for instance, where actually start killing people who are involved in the summoning ritual. Basically get 4 of your group members together and you summon this really big Doomguard that just totally destroys everyone. You can use it to raid, you can use it to wipe entire towns if you feel like it, but it is quite a difficult pre-requirement for you to get the Doomguard quest, which is quite interesting actually. So yeah, you can just kill everyone on your server if you feel like it. So the first healing class I have for you is the Shaman. Basically, Shamans and Paladins in vanilla are basically bards, right? The reason why there's no bard in World of Warcraft and there is in Lord of the Rings Online is because the Shaman and the Paladin are the bard, right? People speculate that, oh, the next class is going to be a bard. No, it's already happened, right? The thing is about Shaman and Retail is totems are like more cooldowns now rather than static buffs. But basically, I think you have like over 10 totems as a Shaman. Basically, you're going to be thinking more about totems and specific totem buffs and defenses and everything, like more than actual healing. The healing part is actually pretty simple. Everything is about the buffs. Anyway, let me run through leveling pretty quickly. You're going to be leveling as an enhancement. You're basically going to be leveling like a warrior, stacking strength, getting a big two-handed weapon. And the playstyle is quite interesting. It's all about front-loading damage. You kind of cast all the stuff you need pretty early on in the fight. You get your lightning shield, your fire totem, your flame shock, and everything like that. You cast it in a chunk, and then you just let everything rot the target down slowly. And that's pretty much it. That's just how it's going to play out. You're going to be casting more than one spell. I think it's a fairly interactive experience, and you're also got the advantage of being able to go fast with Ghost Wolf, so there's another perk. So let me kind of explain the playstyle of Shamans. I did say that everything is mostly about buffs, and you have to adapt what totems you are popping depending on what group you are in, right? You'll get switched around and spread around the group depending on how many Shamans you have in the group. So a good example, you know, you're in a tank group, you'd be popping stone skin totem to protect the tank. You'd be popping resistant totems pretty much in every kind of group. If you're in a melee DPS group, you'd be popping Wind Fury or Strength of the Earth. In a healer group, you'd be, you know, Mana Spring would be essential. In a ranged DPS group, you'd probably be focused on threat reduction, particularly if you're in a heavy Warlock group, you'll be providing threat reduction for the Warlocks. And everything is just kind of situational. You adapt to what group you're in and what your group needs. And there's also other kind of gimmicky totems like Stoneclaw Totem, which can save your tank if he's taking too much damage. Or you can just use it to save yourself. You've got Earthbind to kite mobs, which is kind of underrated actually. You've got AoE You've also got AoE fire totems, which can be quite useful at taking like adds down and stuff. You've got a Wind Wall totem, which is used for helping the raid take less range damage. And then you've got cleansing totems to remove debuffs. So there's loads of different totems that are extremely useful, and it's basically the main unique selling point of a shaman. It's all about totems. And in PvP they can be seriously offensive and seriously strong by just helping warriors basically one-shot the crap out of people with the Wind Fury totem. Let's talk about healing playstyle. It depends on what kind of healing you're doing. In a vanilla, basically you're either going to be healing a tank or you're going to be healing everyone else. If you're healing the tank, you'll be sparsely healing the tank very slowly and steadily. But what you're probably going to be doing as a shaman is AoE healing a melee group. So you'll probably be casting a lower rank chain heal, and you'll probably still top the healing charts, to be honest, just by doing a lower rank chain heal on the melee group and just focusing on keeping the melee group alive with your AoE heals, because you're one of the only classes that has a very sustainable and effective AoE heal in the game. And apart from that, you'll be using lesser healing wave, which is basically your flash heal, to kind of heal spike damage on a raid when they're kind of spread out and you can't use chain heal. So yeah. Oh, and another thing, obviously you can use Purge, which is very useful. Let's go under a few gimmicks of a shaman, the unique selling points. First of all, we've got an extra Hearthstone on a half-an-hour cooldown. This is really underrated because you can get around the map much faster with an extra Hearthstone. It's really useful. You've got Self-Resurrection, which is extremely useful when you're out doing solo content, but also resurrecting a raid, so they don't have to run back into the instance. You've got Ghost Wolf, like I said before, which is really useful in the lower levels, but later levels you probably will just mount. You're also able to solo content pretty easily. You know, you've got weapon buffs, you've got all the enhancement abilities, so you can go out into the content and just, you know, do quests on your own, and then you will eventually get power enough to just like one-shot mobs with Chain Lightning as well, so there's that. Oh, and you also have Water Walking, which is another great perk. And that's pretty much all the gimmicks of a shaman and everything that you need to know about a shaman. The next class we have is the Priest, which is arguably probably the best healer in the game. If we're only talking about healing, then they probably are the best healer in the game. First thing to note when you're playing Priest is to take note of the racials that, you know, Priest have. So depending on what race you have, you'll have different racials. For instance, Dwarf have a Fear Ward, for instance, which is considered the optimal choice, so that's one thing to kind of look up in your own time. But let's, you know, talk about what the Priest is all about. Leveling is kind of fairly easy, one of the easier levelers in the game, because it's actually quite fast. Basically, most of the time you're going to be killing mobs with your wand, and you're going to be benefiting from the enhanced mana regeneration from Spirit Tap. So whenever you get a killing blow, your spirit basically starts regenerating your mana faster, which means you won't be stopping to drink often, because you'll just front load some dot damage and then just wand them in the face until they die. But if you do need to take more than one mob on at once, it is a good idea to pop the Power Ward Shield, and which Power Ward Shield actually stops your cast from being interrupted, which is really useful, and then you can burst the crap out of some damage in Shadow Form and, you know, have some fun. So when it comes to endgame, you're both kind of a very good AoE healer and single target healer. Probably, you know, you're a good mix of both basically. Some classes that, you know, excel at either one. You have a very good toolkit as a Priest. Let's talk about, you know, the playstyle and the toolkit. First thing is Fear Ward. Obviously if you play Dwarf, that is extremely useful to put on a tank. You've got a cooldown for a big crit heal, so like a really good emergency heal. You've got really good threat reduction that you can put on yourself. There's a spec where you can put a specific really powerful buff on a single spellcaster DPS, like a mage. I think it's called Power Infusion. That is really useful. You've also got the ability to remove buffs pretty easily. You can basically you can remove debuffs from targets, friendly targets, but you can also purge off enemy targets as well. So you've got like a purge and debuff capabilities, and quite well. You're quite stocky with Inner Fire as well when you're soloing content. You've got Shackle Undead, which is useful in some quite a few dungeons actually. You know, the kind of undead dungeons like Stratholme and stuff like that, so that's very useful. You've obviously got really good buffs as well to provide to the raid. Everyone's going to be asking for your buffs. You've got a really good spirit buff, which is a talented one depending on what build you go for, and obviously you've got the stamina buff that everyone's probably very familiar with. And you've also got the capability to drain mana, which can be useful in a few unique situations, but it's extremely lethal in PvP, just to drain people's mana. It's a very offensive playstyle. You've also got Mind Soothe, which is an underrated ability. You can skip entire mob packs and save a lot of time doing your dungeons and stuff like that. That's very useful. You've got AoE Fear, which can be an absolute lifesaver, if controlled properly anyway. And you've also got Shadow Resistance buffs, which people are going to be asking for as well. So let me talk about this specific playstyle of Priest. So Priests have this talent where they can basically take advantage of their spirit stat and the regeneration from their spirit stat while they are casting, or within that 5-second window. So basically you are going to be applying that 5-second window to kind of sparsely cast heal so you don't run out of mana, especially if you're in a single group on your own. You know, you can't just spam spells like you can in retail. You have to be conscious and just take pauses now and again. You're probably going to be using Renew quite a lot. Well, not quite a lot, but you're going to be using it on the tank. Basically any target that is taking consistent damage in a raid, very fast spike damage, you are going to be popping HOTS on the tank. You've got Power Word Shield, which is basically only used in emergencies. It's very mana inefficient actually, probably not going to be using it that much, but it is an instant, you know, defensive ability. You're also going to be spell weaving a lot and experimenting with, you'll be doing this as any healer basically, but you're going to be doing what's called spell weaving, where you kind of mix around what rank heal that you're going to use depending on your stats and depending on the situation. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to be the most efficient healer possible. If you overheal even 1 point, you're wasting healing. You don't waste healing in vanilla. That's kind of what the playstyle's all about. It's not like retail where you can overheal. You shouldn't be overhealing basically. It's all about maximum efficiency. So you've also got steady greater heal for the tank. You know, if a tank's taking a lot of damage, you'd probably be asked to steadily use greater heals on the tank. You've got flash heal to, again, like ramp up heal back spike damage on sparsely spread out DPS targets. And you've also got Holy Nova. You've got Holy Nova, which is for situations where the raid is taking really high fast AoE damage, where you can't kind of counter that really high damage by casting what's the other spell called, Prayer of Healing. So you know, if you just literally have no time to cast Prayer of Healing, you've got very instant AoE healing ability, which can also be used quite effectively to do solo AoE farming as well, which can make you quite a bit of money. And then heal, the normal heal ability, is more like used as a casual meh heal when you're trying to save mana. In PvP, you know, you become more focused on using instant casting abilities to keep your team alive, like the Power Word Shield and Renew and stuff, so yeah. Let's talk about quickly gimmicks. Basically, the main gimmick for Priest is Mind Control, right, which is ridiculously overpowered. You can just solo elite zones and elite quests if you're really clever about how you do it, and you can even solo dungeons if you're really skilled. And yeah, but basically just really good at soloing content as well. That's the last gimmick I have for you. And let's jump on to the next class. So next we have the Paladin, which, as I described before, is basically another bard kind of style class. It's less about the healing, even though they actually are the best single target healer in the game. It is more about the buffs. So but they provide a lot of advantages to a raid because of their buffs. Let's talk about the leveling very briefly. It is a little bit boring, honestly a little bit slow, the leveling as a Paladin, but at least there's no downtime. There's no downtime because you can cast self-heals, which is an advantage. But most of it is you're just buffing your weapon with a seal, and then you're consuming the seal with a judgment, and then you're reapplying the seal, and it's rinse and repeat. It's like 2 buttons pretty much all the way to level 60, unfortunately. But oh well. Let's move on. You are basically, as a Paladin, the best single target healer in the game. You will probably end up being the tank buddy, the assigned healer who basically just looks after the tank, right? You have a really big toolkit when it comes to buffs. So there's loads of different buffs in different situations, you know, more damage, more health, less threat, damage reduction, mana regen, amplify healing, damage transfer. There's loads of different buffs. You should look at like the proper spell list, and you'd be surprised how many more buffs there are in vanilla than there is to retail. You've also got auras, which can provide quite an advantage as well. You've got auras which, you know, provide extra damage. They provide resistance. Or another good one is cast interruption reduction. I can't remember what it's called, the specific aura, but that is a very useful aura. Apart from that, in your toolkit, you've obviously got debuff removing, you've got fear for the undead targets, you've got a big critical heal buff, like the priest do, you've got a big CC, long CC for humans, you've got a big quick heal, or because of Holy Shock, you've got like an instant heal for emergency situations, you've got a very useful stun, Hammer of Justice, very underrated, you should be using it as a healer. You can help out with damage as well, which is another good thing. If you're running low on mana, you just pop Seal of Wisdom and start whacking a target and get your mana back. That's another good way to play in a dungeon. And I think one of the biggest unique selling points, we probably should have mentioned it earlier, is all the ridiculously overpowered life-saving abilities that Paladin have. They are just ridiculous, right? You've got Divine Shield, you've got Blessing of Protection, Divine Intervention, which can prevent raid wipes. And the most overpowered ability, in my opinion, is Lay on Hands. It's basically like a cheat code. You pop Lay of Hands, you got instant health again. That is a cheat code. That spell's a cheat. It is on a 1 hour cooldown though. So yeah. Basically, as a paladin, you can save the group, or even the entire raid group, more than a few times with your ridiculously overpowered abilities. So, let's talk about the gimmicks. Let's talk about healing playstyle. Basically, this is the only class in the game that can spam abilities, and that's because of the Illumination talent. Basically, whenever you get a critical heal, you basically refund 30% of your mana, which is really useful. Which means you're going to be single target healing a lot, and you just get half your mana back all the time. So, like, I'm not saying it's infinite mana, but it's pretty close to infinite mana, especially when you get really high geared. And unfortunately, with Paladin, it's all single target healing, and there isn't any AoE healing at all, apart from maybe Seal of Light, I don't know, but probably not. Oh, and just one last thing, they are very good at soloing content, particularly AoE farming, because you're increasing your spell damage with healing gear. When you pop Consecration, which is an AoE holy damage effect, you start doing a lot of damage with that thing, so you can go out into the world and AoE farm quite effectively. The last class we have is the Druid. Basically, the Druid is the jack of all trades, that's how most people describe it. You're basically playing a priest, a rogue, a warrior and a mage pretty much all at once, right? Form swapping is an extremely fun playstyle. It keeps the playstyle fresh. You're bored of one thing, you can just start doing another totally new thing, right? You are just an unstoppable shapeshifter. That's one of the really good things about playing Druid, is every time you switch form, everything's kind of reset, like your movement speed debuffs and everything. So let's talk about the leveling briefly. You're going to level as a cat. There's no other effective way to level, really, and it is quite fast. You basically just play as a rogue. It's basically just like leveling a rogue with even less downtime as a rogue, because you can just swap out of, cat form and just heal yourself. Like, it's basically like having access to every single class in the game. It is that is the kind of playstyle the Druid has. It also means you can tank. Like, if you're leveling up and you're looking for a group, you can actually jump into a group as a tank or a healer. Right, which means finding groups as a Druid is really easy when you're leveling up. So that's another perk. Another great perk. Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm proper nerve glitching now. Another perk is the travel form, because that massively decreases your leveling time. And you've also got stealth. Stealth is really underrated. You can get in and out of things very easily and kind of avoid. Basically, it just provides a massive time save in a number of situations while leveling up. So let's talk about the playstyle. I'll talk about, the kind of toolkit that Druids have. They are considered the worst healer in the game. If we're only talking about healing, again, classes bring other advantages that shouldn't be ignored. Classes have other value than tanking, DPS, and healing in vanilla, and that's an important thing to take notice of. So one of the first unique selling points is being able to buff the mana of other healers. So if you've got someone on your team who basically just isn't that good at being mana efficient, then you can pop an Innervate on them. Another thing is you have the only combat res in the game, which can literally save wipes. You know, combat resing a tank is extremely useful. You have really good buffs. Gift of the Wild is, you know, pretty much a full-on all-stat buff, which is very useful. You've also got Thorns, which is underrated. Druids should use it more often. You should definitely pop that on the tank because, first of all, it increases the overall group damage, but it also increases the tank aggro and just helps the tank out quite a lot. Thorns is a very good buff, especially when it's stacked with the Imp's Fire Shield from the Warlock. Another thing, obviously, you can swap in and out of form, so use different abilities. So, like, you need to catch up with your tank because he's, like, out of the way. You can just pop into cat form, pop dash, sprint around. You can pop into bear form and use a stun, or you can use a debuff with the demoralizing roar spell. And another thing, you know, you can reduce the aggro range a bit like Mind Soothe on beast targets with a Soothe Animal spell. You can debuff enemies, and you can also stop them from stealthing and reduce their armor. So yeah, there's a lot of nice stuff like that. Debuff removal, obviously, you're one of the only 2 classes in the game that can remove curses, right? So that's why you're really useful in a raid, actually, because some curses are quite nasty, and it's only a mage. Mages just don't have the mindset of let's help other players, right? They just want to tunnel vision damage and stuff. They always forget to remove curses. You've also got Nature's Grasp, which is one of the best escaping abilities in the game. It's definitely useful in outside content. So let's talk about healing playstyle. It's very similar to the others. I'd say it's fairly similar to Priest. You know, you use big heals sparsely on the tank. You'll put a hot on the tank to, you know, counter fast, consistent spike damage. You'll also probably use Regrowth, which is another good spell to heal spike damage from on other targets, but it is a little mana hungry, so you probably won't be using it that much. You also have a really good AoE heal. You have Tranquility, which is actually better used as a preemptive maneuver to counter big AoE, well, imminent AoE damage. So that's a good thing. And yeah, there's also a Swift Meld build. That's something advanced though, you probably have to look that up in your own time, but the Swift Meld build, basically you pop this spell which makes your hots heal faster, so it's, you know, but some druids use it, some druids don't. So look that up when you decide to play druid. Let's look at other gimmicks. Obviously you can teleport to Moonglade. You basically have your own zone randomly. Like, it's a bit unfair really, it's a bit classist, isn't it? Druids get their entire zone. But it is a pretty dreary, boring zone, to be honest. You're probably only going to go over there for a few quests. What else do we have? You are basically the best flag carrier in the game as well. You are very useful in PvP, because yeah, you just, one, you're immortal, and your escaping ability is literally limitless. And there's loads of different specs to choose from for PvP. So if you get bored of one, you can pick another. Like, there's just so many different optimal specs that you can try out for PvP. So yeah, give that a go. Anyway guys, I'm going to end the video there because I've talked long enough and my throat is starting to hurt. My name is Medagoblin, and until my next video, ciao.